The Beatles are regarded as a representation of harmony, originality, and musical brilliance. However, beneath their well-preserved exterior were intense personal disputes. The tense friendship between George Harrison and Paul McCartney was one of the most captivating. Tension frequently simmered just out of sight, despite the fact that listeners loved their music and believed the trio was harmonious. Their relationship was characterized by quiet arguments and subtle annoyances rather than overt animosity, which influenced their collaboration and the band's legacy in ways that the general public seldom witnessed. At last, George disclosed the real cause of his ongoing conflict with Paul, and you and everyone else in the industry will be shocked by this news. The legacy of George Harrison's Beatles. The tale of George Harrison's life and music is one of unquestionable creative genius, spiritual discovery, and quiet tenacity. Harrison was born on February 25, 1943, in Liverpool, England, into a working-class family. Music soon became Harrison's love. Early on, his passion for the guitar made him stand out, and by the time he was a teenager, his peers were praising him for his skill and commitment to learning the instrument. When he teamed up with John Lennon and Paul McCartney in the early 1960s, that ability would change his life, as he became the lead guitarist of a band that would eventually revolutionize popular music. Harrison may have been the Beatles' youngest member, but as he refined his skills and found his own voice, his influence within the group grew progressively. Harrison started experimenting with musical genres outside of the Beatles' conventional rock and roll base by the middle of the 1960s. In a daring move that would help change not only the band's direction, but also the soundscape of Western popular music, he incorporated Indian music into the band's sound between 1965 and 1969. His sitar lessons, especially with the renowned Ravi Shankar, enhanced his playing and broadened the group's creative horizons. The songs he contributed during this time are still among the Beatles' most well-known. Here Comes the Sun, which swiftly rose to prominence as one of the band's most cherished songs, offered warmth and hope, while My Guitar Gently Weeps demonstrated both his lyrical depth and his ability to combine passion with forceful guitar performance. Harrison's ballad, Something, was so exquisite that even critics who had previously disregarded him were compelled to recognize his brilliant lyrics. Harrison changed during these years, from the so-called quiet Beatle to a creative force whose music coexisted with the well-known compositions of McCartney and Lennon. Harrison organized the concert for Bangladesh in 1971, showcasing his compassion and vision once more. One of the first significant charity benefit concerts in the history of popular music took place in New York, assembling a number of renowned performers. The concert helped raise money and awareness for Bangladesh Liberation War refugees. Harrison's actions demonstrated his dedication to leveraging his platform for charitable causes and went beyond music. In addition to setting the bar for upcoming charity events, the concert demonstrated his ability to combine politics with art, demonstrating the transformative power of music. Harrison kept moving forward by 1974, when he and Ravi Shankar went on the renowned Dark Horse Tour, an ambitious North American tour. By fusing Eastern and Western traditions in a manner that few major rock artists had tried, this tour demonstrated his resolve to spread his passion for Indian music to a wider audience. Harrison's strained vocals and the unusual nature of the performances caused the tour to elicit conflicting opinions, but it was nonetheless a pivotal point in his career. It emphasized his readiness to take chances and defy expectations, qualities that had always characterized his creative trajectory. Harrison's commercial success began to recover in the 1980s. The catchy hit song Got My Mind Set on You was featured on his 1988 album Cloud9. The album confirmed Harrison's place as a major figure in popular music and reintroduced him to a new generation of listeners. Fans welcomed the record as a victorious comeback, while critics lauded it for its new sound. Harrison's capacity for adaptation and relevance was demonstrated throughout this time. His return was more than just nostalgic, despite the fact that musical tastes had drastically changed since the Beatles' heyday. It demonstrated that his creativity could endure in the face of change. Harrison started a new chapter in his career in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when he joined musical legends Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne to form the supergroup the Touring Wilburys. Harrison discovered a cooperative setting that rekindled his love of music making. Fans were reminded of the delight that comes from equals working together through the group's critically praised albums, which were the product of their fun energy and combined brilliance. Harrison's ability to blend in while maintaining his individuality was further demonstrated by the Wilbur's work. Harrison also took part in the Beatles' anthology project around this time, which was a huge undertaking that looked back at the band's heritage that had initially made him famous. Harrison provided his own viewpoint on the Beatles' journey, helped preserve their tale through interviews, recordings, and personal observations, and made sure that future generations might appreciate the influence of their music. George's illness, attacks, raids, and litigation. George Harrison's talent, spirituality, and persona as the quiet Beatle, whose songs has a unique fusion of beauty and depth, are frequently used to frame his legacy. Harrison's story did, however, include darker periods, times of adversity and controversy, which stood in stark contrast to the tranquility he sought in both life and music. As is the case with many great musicians, despite his remarkable accomplishments, his journey was not without controversy, criticism from the public, and personal suffering. It is crucial to consider Harrison's struggles, in addition to his professional achievements, in order to comprehend him completely. A fuller image of the man behind the music is painted by these problems and conflicts, which show resiliency, vulnerability, and the capacity to face obstacles that may have broken others. The most well-known controversy in Harrison's career may have occurred in the years after his solo debut, rather than during Beatlemania in the 1960s. His song My Sweet Lord became a worldwide anthem after it was published in 1970, as a part of his wildly popular All Things Must Pass album. Its spiritual message and upbeat tune won over listeners all around the world, giving Harrison a successful moment as a songwriter in his own right. But a lawsuit that would follow him for decades soon eclipsed its success. Harrison was sued by Bright Tunes Music in 1971, claiming that My Sweet Lord was a cover of the Chiffons' hit song, He's So Fine, which was written by Ronnie Mack. Years passed throughout the protracted litigation, and Harrison's defense mostly focused on arguing that any resemblances were accidental. In the end, the court determined that Harrison had committed what is known as subliminal plagiarism, which implies that he unintentionally replicated the tune in his own song, rather than purposefully copying it. Some thought Harrison was unduly penalized for an accident that might have happened to any songwriter working within the constrained melodic range of popular music, while others supported the ruling. The litigation was a creative and personal setback for Harrison. His spiritual path was closely linked to music. Therefore, it was a sad irony that his greatest personal hit was turned into a legal struggle. Harrison was forced to relive the frustration for decades, as the case dragged on until the 1990s, longer than typical copyright disputes. Despite its continued popularity, My Sweet Lord's background is inextricably linked to one of the most contentious and protracted legal disputes in music history. Harrison was annoyed by court cases, but an incident decades later left him deeply unsettled. In 1999, a psychotic intruder severely disturbed the peaceful existence he had established at his home, Friar Park. Harrison was attacked by the individual who broke into the house, stabbing him with a knife several times. The abrupt outburst of aggression was startling for a person who had dedicated a significant portion of his life to seeking serenity and spiritual stability. Harrison's wife, Olivia's prompt and courageous actions, striking the intruder with a lamp and fighting him off until help arrived, were crucial to his safety. Harrison was left emotionally and physically devastated by the attack. Friar Park had served as his haven, a haven from the demands of celebrity. However, even home didn't seem completely safe after the tragedy. The incursion demonstrated how celebrities, regardless of how private their lives got, are susceptible to unforeseen risks. The news shocked fans and the general public, since it brought attention to the worst aspects of celebrity, such as the possibility of obsession and violence from strangers. The incident served as a harsh reminder to Harrison, who cherished privacy and frequently sought solace from the spotlight, that his celebrity could invade his life in the most horrifying ways. He was put to the test by violence in the late 1990s, but at about the same time, he began to face significant health issues. Harrison was diagnosed with throat cancer in 1997 as a result of years of smoking in his early years. After receiving treatment, he seemed to be getting better for a while, but his health issues were far from resolved. Harrison was diagnosed with lung cancer and a brain tumor by the early 2000s. Harrison frequently refuted rash or inflated stories about the seriousness of his condition, but the story swiftly spread. Even the most admired people's frailties were exposed during these latter years of disease. Harrison's fragility was revealed to fans who had previously viewed him as the epitome of spiritual serenity. Nevertheless, he maintained a modest dignity, despite his disease. He never let his disease completely eclipse his identity as a truth-seeker and musician. Harrison handled the difficult situation with the same quiet fortitude that had long characterized him. Despite the conflict between the public's need for information and his need for solitude. In the end, his fight with cancer turned into one of the most poignant and final periods of his life, demonstrating that beneath the music and celebrity lay a man facing death head-on. However, Harrison had previously been embroiled in scandal, while still associated with the Beatles long before these difficulties. Police conducted what was formally referred to as a narcotics search at his house in 1969. Harrison was charged with marijuana possession, after authorities said they had discovered hashish on the home. However, concerns over the legitimacy of the raid were raised right after. There were rumors that the narcotics might have been put to try to get him involved. Despite the lack of conclusive evidence, the dispute captured the suspicion that pervaded rock artists in the late 1960s, when law enforcement regularly targeted counterculture personalities. Quarrymen to Now and Then Legacy by Paul McCartney. Paul McCartney was born in Liverpool, England, on June 18, 1942, marking the beginning of his journey. He was raised in a working-class household and fell in love with music at a young age, a love that would later influence his entire life and career. Paul's father supported his musical abilities, which gave him the tools and self-assurance to start writing songs and performing at an early age. His early musical orientation was greatly influenced by Liverpool, with its diverse range of cultural influences. McCartney's initial moves toward becoming a worldwide icon would take root in this setting. The meeting of John Lennon, who was performing with his skiffle group the Quarrymen at a local fair on July 6, 1957, marked a significant turning point for McCartney. The history of music would be altered by this encounter. McCartney joined the group shortly after impressing Lennon with his guitar prowess and musical understanding. The foundation for the Beatles was laid by Lennon and McCartney's collaboration, which turned into one of the most important songwriting partnerships of the 20th century. They create the stage for an unmatched musical adventure by challenging and balancing each other. Early in the 1960s, the Beatles became well known. However, as the decade went on, the group started to have creative and personal conflicts. Paul McCartney formally announced his departure from the Beatles on April 10, 1970. As a result of these issues, his announcement, which stunned fans all across the world, essentially cemented the band's dissolution. The choice was both challenging and freeing for McCartney. It allowed him to explore new avenues as a solo artist and brought an end to one of the most revolutionary periods in music history. McCartney started his solo career as soon as he left the Beatles. His first solo album, McCartney, which demonstrated his range as a performer and was a very personal endeavor, was released in 1970. Ram, which Paul and his wife Linda McCartney formed in 1971, came next. The two albums demonstrated that McCartney could succeed independent of the band that had shaped him and signaled the start of his post-Beatles identity. In order to continue creating music while sharing the stage with his spouse, McCartney and Linda soon founded the band Wings, fusing artistry and family. McCartney kept moving on with Wings and other endeavors during the 1970s and early 1980s. His position in popular music was further cemented by the band's streak of singles and chart-topping triumph. McCartney's compositions from this era also demonstrated his capacity to change with the times and modify his approach without sacrificing the melodic mastery that had always characterized his songs. His steady output over these years showed his commitment to his art and his capacity to manage both his celebrity and his home life with Linda and their kids. As the 1980s turned into the 1990s, McCartney began concentrating more on solo endeavors and partnerships. He collaborated with a variety of musicians, which broadened his taste in music and introduced him to new listeners. He also participated in the Beatles anthology project around this time, which was a significant milestone that gave him the chance to re-establish a connection with his history while telling the Beatles' story to a younger audience. The anthology was a commercial and cultural success, allowing McCartney to celebrate his relationship with Ringo Starr, George Harrison, and Lennon, while also serving as a reminder of the group's lasting influence. McCartney's career lasted well into the 21st century, proving his durability in a field that is always changing. He put out few noteworthy solo albums between 2013 and 2020, including McCartney 3 in 2020 and New in 2013. Both albums demonstrated his capacity to stay innovative and current while producing music for many years. His memoir-style book, The Lyrics 1956 to the Present, was released in 2021, providing followers with a rare glimpse into his songwriting process and introspection. In addition to honoring his career, McCartney gave readers access to the personal backstories of his songs in this piece. McCartney hasn't shown any signs of slowing down, even in his older years. He returned to touring with the Got Back Tour in 2022 and 2023, exciting crowds with performances that covered his career. These performances demonstrated both the enduring affection that his fans have for his songs and his extraordinary energy and passion for live performance. Simultaneously, McCartney took part in one of the most significant events in contemporary Beatles history by working with the band on the song Now and Then, which used archive recordings and contemporary technology to reunite the group. The song's Grammy win for Best Rock Performance highlighted the Beatles' enduring influence and McCartney's contribution to preserving their legacy. The lyrics, bands, arrests, and AI conflicts of McCartney. There have been some incredible high points in Paul McCartney's career. However, like any artist who has spent a significant portion of his life in the spotlight, it has also involved a number of problems and disputes. Even though they can be awkward at times, these incidents offer crucial background information for comprehending the complexities of his career as a musician and public person. They highlight the difficulties of adjusting to shifting social norms, personal preferences, and historical contexts, in addition to the scrutiny that accompanies celebrity. A more complete picture of McCartney as a guy who consistently strikes a balance between creativity and responsibility is painted when these conflicts are examined alongside his accomplishments. When McCartney was arrested for marijuana possession in Tokyo in 1980, it was one of the most well-known scandals of his life. He was detained right away after customs officers found the narcotic in his suitcase when he arrived. Fans who were anticipating McCartney's performances were stunned when he was imprisoned in Japan for 9 days. The incident garnered international attention. Many fans who had bought tickets were disappointed when Wings' Japan tour was canceled due to the arrest, which also had professional repercussions. The incident was humiliating and disruptive for McCartney, and it was one of the most significant legal issues in his otherwise prosperous career. The arrest in Japan has symbolic significance as well. Given Japan's stringent drug laws, many found it odd that a celebrity like McCartney would take such a risk. The incident sparked discussions on musicians' obligations as public figures, with detractors claiming that his actions damaged the innocent persona he had built up, particularly in the years following the Beatles. Others saw it as an indication of attitudes that still existed from the counterculture of the 1960s, when drug use was more publicly publicized. Regardless of how it was seen, the arrest brought to light the conflict between McCartney's personal decisions and his public image. McCartney's 1972 song, Give Ireland Back to the Irish, had caused a different kind of controversy years prior. The song took a strong political stand and was written in reaction to Bloody Sunday, when British troops shot and killed unarmed protesters in Northern Ireland. Its message, which demanded that Northern Ireland be returned to the Irish people, was straightforward and unrepentant. Citing the song's overtly political lyrics, the BBC swiftly banned it. But for McCartney, the song was a statement of his anger and his readiness to use his position to further causes that he supported. The song's importance was not lessened by its ban. Conversely, the censorship increased the track's visibility and affirmed McCartney's status as an artist who isn't scared to voice his opinions, even when doing so causes criticism. This incident also brought up more significant issues regarding the place of musicians in political discourse, and whether or not songs should be used as platforms for activism. In McCartney's case, Give Ireland Back to the Irish showed that he was willing to venture into contentious area when he felt obliged to voice his opinions, even if it meant jeopardizing his popularity with the general public. When McCartney released the song Big Boys Bickering as a B-side in the 1990s, it sparked controversy once more. The song's use of profanity, which was uncommon and surprising coming from a performer known for his catchy and frequently family-friendly songs, was what caused controversy. Many fans and critics were taken aback by the song's direct language, which sparked conversations on artistic freedom and the limits of lyrical material. The song was McCartney's attempt to make a strong message. The response to Big Boy's arguments mirrored the conflict between McCartney's established persona and his ambition to try new things or approach problems in novel ways. Even though it questioned the public's view of him as a generally clean-cut figure, some viewed the vulgarity as superfluous, while others considered it as a welcome change that demonstrated McCartney's freedom from expectations, even decades into his career. Even when the song itself is less important than the response it elicits, The issue demonstrated how audiences frequently hold artists to specific standards, and how defying those expectations may lead to conflict. In addition to particular songs, McCartney has come under fire for his thoughts about his previous language. Later in life, he freely admitted that he occasionally used racially derogatory expressions in his childhood, which were part of the prevailing lexicon at the time. By confronting the matter head-on, McCartney did not justify his acts, but rather presented them as a reflection of the ignorance of the time. He emphasized how social consciousness has evolved over the years, while simultaneously acknowledging the harm that such language causes. McCartney's confessions positioned her inside the larger discourse of cultural change and accountability. He showed a readiness to grow and own up to his mistakes by facing his history head-on, which struck a chord with many who respected his candor. However, it also served as a reminder to the world that even well-known people can be influenced by the prejudices of their era. His thoughts were incorporated into the broader discussion of how society faces its history and how people can transcend antiquated beliefs. McCartney has been involved in discussions concerning contemporary technology and how it affects artists in more recent years. He expressed concern in 2025 about proposed changes to UK copyright laws that might permit AI businesses to use creative works without paying the original creators. McCartney cautioned that such regulations might undermine artistic expression and jeopardize the means of support for authors, musicians, and other artists. His actions demonstrated his continued support of the rights of people employed in the creative sectors, in addition to his function as an artist. Harrison's explanation for his disagreement with McCartney. George Harrison's tenure with the Beatles is renowned for its impact on culture and outstanding music. However, tensions developed behind the scenes, especially between Harrison and Paul McCartney. Harrison frequently felt like the quiet person in the background, fighting to make his voice heard, while Lennon and McCartney's creative collaboration with the band took center stage. His grievances, particularly with McCartney's management style and leadership style, turned into one of the group's most persistent disputes. These conflicts influenced Harrison's sense of self inside one of the most well-known bands in history. In addition to the environment in the studio, after Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, passed away in 1967, the problems worsened. McCartney took on a more creative leadership role in the absence of Epstein's stabilizing influence, directing the band's projects and establishing the cadence of their work. This could have appeared to be natural leadership to many, but Harrison only felt more marginalized as a result. By this point, he was already starting to feel resentful of his inferiority to McCartney and Lennon, whose compositions and concepts frequently eclipsed his own. Harrison found the change especially discouraging because he was starting to establish himself despite being a songwriter and thinker, he was nonetheless viewed as the group's junior member. Harrison's sense of alienation only grew stronger after Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was recorded in 1967. Harrison only contributed one song, Within You, Without You, to the album, which is hailed as one of the best ever. Harrison acknowledged that he had lost interest in being famous, at a time when McCartney's bold vision was leading the band into uncharted creative areas. He had struggled to get 3 of his songs on Revolver just a year prior, which was a turning point in his career as a songwriter. Sgt. Was reduced back to a single track. Harrison became disillusioned and more opposed to the path McCartney was taking the band in. After Pepper felt like a step backward, Harrison was looking for inspiration outside of the Beatles. By the late 1960s, there was a welcome sense of camaraderie and teamwork during his time in upstate New York, with Bob Dylan and the band's future members. Harrison was impressed by Dylan's circle's unstructured collaboration and open sharing of ideas and contributions. When he returned to London, he thought the Beatles would adopt this egalitarian ethos. Rather, he was once again forced to deal with McCartney's strong will, particularly in regards to composition and arrangement. Harrison was deeply disappointed. The studio chemistry back home was a far cry from the collaborative environment he had experienced in America. The sessions for what would become Let It Be were when the stress peaked. In Graham Thompson's book, George Harrison Behind the Locked Door, engineer and producer Glenn Johns, who was originally assigned to oversee the project, subsequently described the environment as extremely uncomfortable. It was quite uncomfortable to watch this start and to be present in the immediate aftermath. John's statements encapsulated the tension that had grown evident among the band members, especially when Harrison's need for independence and respect was weighed against McCartney's domination. Harrison's former wife, Pattie Boyd, also gave an honest account of life at home during those times. She explained that Thompson was quite dissatisfied in an interview she did with him for the same book. He didn't like the Beatles since they were always fighting. They treated one another viciously. Since he had this new spiritual path, that was even more distressing for him. He was shoved to the side like a younger brother. He would be furious when he got home from recording. According to Boyd, the fact that he was in such a terrible situation demonstrated how profoundly Harrison's emotional health was impacted by his disagreement with McCartney and the other Beatles. Boyd could see the crux of the issue. They would put up with each other, but I believe George didn't like Paul's personality in general, she said. Her statement underscored that there was a collision of human dynamics, in addition to artistic disputes. I just think they really didn't love each other. Harrison's relationship with McCartney appeared more tense and aloof, characterized by a lack of warmth between the two, whereas Lennon and McCartney maintained a creative bond that carried both tension and affection. Harrison finally left the band during the Let It Be sessions, as a result of the tension. His brief absence conveyed a strong message about the toll that his surroundings were having on him. He consented to come back, but only under certain restrictions. The Beatles would relocate to a cozier location after leaving the chilly Twickenham studios. McCartney would need to control his domineering inclinations, and keyboardist Billy Preston would be brought in to smooth the dynamic. Although these compromises were merely short-term fixes, they allowed the band to continue. Lennon's announcement of his own departure later that year marked the start of the Beatles' demise. Even after the band broke up, Harrison's remarks made it clear how uncomfortable he was with McCartney. In retrospect, he joked, "I couldn't join a band with Paul McCartney, but it's nothing personal." This statement was telling, since it implied that Harrison understood that collaborating closely with McCartney once more was just not feasible, even if he didn't have a direct animosity toward him. Even though Harrison was cautious to phrase it in a non-malignant manner, the line emphasized how tension had characterized their professional relationship. Harrison's years of feeling overlooked were strikingly validated in 1970 with the release of All Things Must Pass. The ambitious and wide-ranging triple album revealed the depth of songwriting that the Beatles had frequently suppressed. Harrison demonstrated that he had been full of creative energy for a long time, waiting for the chance to properly express himself. With songs like What Is Life and My Sweet Lord, it was evident from the album's success that it outperformed his former teammates' solo debuts. At last, the world could hear that Harrison was more than just the silent bug. Interestingly, Harrison's resentment of the Beatles did not translate into a complete rejection of his history. He discussed the possibility of a Beatles reunion at a press conference for his Dark Horse tour in 1974, which was documented in George Harrison on George Harrison Interviews and Interactions. "It's all a dream," he stated. "If we ever do that, the reason will be that we are all broke. I'd rather have Willie Weeks on bass than Paul McCartney. It's the reality of the Beatles reunion." Paul's remarks, with all due respect, were honest and slightly humorous. However, they also exposed the persistent hesitancy to resume musical collaborations with McCartney, even years after the band's dissolution.